So the car is now safely raised on stands about 15 inches above the ground. It's supported in the rear at the jack point. It's sitting on ramps. This is not special effects in the front. Rather than drive the vehicle on the ramps, it was jacked up and the ramp slid underneath. And looking at the general lay of the job to come, this is the underside of the vehicle. This is the front left tire here, so panning underneath the engine and transmission, you can see the underbody paneling. There's a front tray that is underneath the engine, and then another wraparound tray that goes underneath the transmission. And you can see they're held by just some fairly small, good condition bolts. There's just 5 or 6 to get those panels off. And once that panel is free, then our work will involve removing the oil pan. So let's go ahead and get started, get these protective panels off, and get a look at that valve, the oil pan. These are 8mm bolts, 8mm head, just using the small 1/4-inch ratchet on them. A little bit oriented here. There we go. Okay, this appears to be the heat shield that we're to remove. It's on the passenger side of the transmission. It looks like it's held by 1 T30 Torx there, and possibly another at the top. Okay, it's still fastened at the top, so it looks like there is a second T30 here. Let's loosen that. I think it's just a pinch clamp. Sure enough. Now it's clear, and the place where the connector goes into the transmission is now visible. Before we lose it, we'll put the screw back in the hole. So with the heat shield now removed, we've gone ahead and positioned this drain pan underneath the drain plug, and we'll go ahead and drain the fluid out of the transmission. It's like a 6mm hex socket. Let's see if we can pop this with just a 3/8 drive, or if we need a little more power. Nope, that was very easy. It was barely tight. Drain pan is definitely positioned. I can tell the plug is finger tight here, so we'll go ahead and let the fluid flow. After this fluid is drained out very thoroughly, we'll remove the perimeter reverse Torx, as I call it, retaining bolts, and we'll remove that pan. And the size on the pan bolts is a Torx E10, but we want to let this drain quite thoroughly. So we might give this 5 minutes or so to drain completely. So let's go ahead and get started. This is going to drip as the pan seal begins to let go. So at first there shouldn't be any fluid loss, but then there will be some dripping as this cover is removed. And these are actually, it's more than just a bolt. It's held by little clips, essentially, that are each positioned by a long bolt. So it's important to keep those matched up. They have a particular orientation when they're returned. So as I do that corner, it looks like the heat shield screw is actually part of the retaining clip for that portion of the pan. So that's a special location. The others should be pretty much identical. We're going to do the corners first, then the two in the middle. There should be 6 total. I'm going to go ahead and crack the last 2, get them finger tight, and then just take them out by hand. Next to the last 2 being the 2 center mid-pan position ones. Okay, they're loose. The pan may not actually drop as these bolts are loosened. I'm actually hopeful that it will not. It may be held by a little bit of just adhesion of the seal, and that might actually, nope, it's the seal is releasing as we go here, so I'm taking care to position the drain, the catch basin here to catch this as it drains, and quite a bit of fluid is coming out. We'll hold it up as best we can by hand as we take the bolts off, and then we'll by hand lower it down so that it spills into the pan in a little more controlled fashion. Get it able to turn on both sides. There we go. Okay, the far pan bolt is removed. There's nothing holding up the far side but my hand. Now removing the near one. The driver's side from your point of view. Okay, the last bolt now completely free. So let me try and get this pan off with a minimum of unanticipated spillage here. Seems like we've got a snag at the rear of the pan. Doesn't want to come completely clear. Might be hung up on this bracket, but I'm able to at least lower the pan down, and that dumps the contents out. That's really what I was after. Now the pan is completely clear. Now it's just a matter of waiting for the fluid to drain off the filter and the valve body and so forth, until we eventually, in a second step, remove this this entire valve body. So we're going to let this drain 5 minutes or so. Let me go ahead and remove this filter, which is not supposed to have any fasteners, so it looks like it's just going to pull free. Let's go ahead and see if I can get that. It didn't want to come before. There we go. That's what I was after. Valve body to transmission bolts are T30s. So that was what the heat shield was. But before I can remove those, we need to get that plug undone on the far side of the transmission. And to do that, it looks like I may need to get a look at it to see what kind of a lock mechanism it has on it. So I'm wiping this off so I don't get dripped on too awfully much. There we go. All it took was a little wiggle, and there's a tiny squeeze clip on one side that I applied some pressure to, but I believe it was just the wiggling action that freed it. So now I'm going to remove all but the center valve body to transmission screws, the center fore and aft, forward and rear. Once the valve body is loose, we'll just lower it down into the pan and pull the pan and valve body out from under the vehicle together. Careful as I'm removing these to look for any difference in length or diameter or the fastener head before I mix them up. I believe they are all identical, but I'm just checking that as I go. These come out easily. There's no tension on them as long as the center two bolts are holding the weight. Weight bears against them, and then when the valve body comes clear, there'll be another rush of fluid that had been trapped above the valve body inside the transmission, which is why we're working over the pan. Tell by the occasional mist drip that we were not perfectly positioned over the pan, so getting a little extra room there, extra margin. Okay, down to the last two bolts. I'll take them out a few turns initially, individually, before I hold before I support the valve body. What's going to happen is that'll break the seal above the valve body and hopefully drain out some of the fluids before I have to support it. Here it comes. Let that drain for a bit. You can see the valve body is free to move on the, relative to the two screws still retaining it. I'm trying to coax as much of the fluid out of it as I can, again, so I don't get dripped on unnecessarily. The only other critical bit as this comes out is that there's a pin and detente that have to align on reassembly, so there's no caution on disassembly, and we'll note as we take this out which corner that's in. That's common to most similar transmission setups. Okay, removing the forward fastener, supporting the valve body by hand, front fastener completely clear, moving the rear fastener, clear. Now the entire valve body should be free to drop. We're going to wiggle and see what we get. Has not come clear so far. Well, that can certainly suspend on its own if need be. If I need to research, look at a picture of the top side to see what we might be hung up on, but we have our electrical connector clear. There we go. That's what it actually needed. It was a little push on the electrical connector, was still hung up on the hole there. So here we are, the transmission turbine tunnel with the holes for the sensors, and the valve body is now in the pan, ready to pull out from under the vehicle for shipment to the vendor for exchange. And then what I'm going to do is put the pan back into position with just a couple of screws in order to keep this free of dirt and debris during the time that the valve body is at the vendor for service. So having removed the valve body from the car, there's one more procedure before the conductor plate goes in for repair, and that is to strip the conductor plate, the plastic piece here, from the valve body, because although the vendors need to code together or wed the transmission control unit and the conductor plate, they don't want to deal with all this extra bulk. So that's pretty straightforward. The solenoids just plug in. There's no wiring. They just plug into the conductor plate, and those clamps are held by T40 Torx, and then there's a half dozen or 7 bolts that hold the conductor plate to the valve body itself. So just checking those are indeed T40s. We'll go ahead and loosen the clamp and free up these solenoids. The clamp's just like it seems, a little T-shaped hold down mechanism, and then the solenoids are free to lift up. I'm going to go ahead and pull both clamps, really all 4, before I remove the solenoids. There are 2 different types of solenoids, as you can see by color, but other than color, they should be interchangeable, and that's verifiable by the part numbers that are directly on them. So this solenoid should just unplug. He belongs to the left of that clamp. This one unplugs. He belongs to the right of that clamp. Okay, that's all 8 solenoids removed, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think it's 7 bolts total that are T30s that need to come out to remove the conductor plate from the valve body. So let's go ahead and take those out. There goes number 6. Now removing number 7. This, I may need to look at this connection here. No, it's actually free. So the conductor plate is now completely free and clear and free to navigate here. So this is the piece that we'll send off to the third party for repair, and that'll come back with this component nicely coated to match the new piece that they provide. So that's the valve body without the conductor plate in place. There's one bit of cleaning that's worth doing here. This circular surface here that's right on the sliding component here, that's actually a magnet that accumulates any metal particles that might be in the fluid. So before you put the new valve body on, just wipe that clean with a clean rag, and then you know, these particles here then won't be in your transmission on reassembly. So that's actually called out in the service manual to clean the magnet before assembly. As a quick storage note, the safest place to store the solenoids and the clamps while the part is away for repair and not lose their ordering is to just drop them in the holes that they came from and set the clamps up with them. So we've received and unboxed our package from Module Repair Pro in Van Nuys. We're down to just the bubble wrap here. I think we can forgive them the Toyota Genuine Parts wrap. Perhaps they're working on other vehicle types rather than just the Mercedes. And this looks like our conductor plate. Let's see what condition it's returned in. So this is indeed our same conductor plate. I recognize some of the scuffs and so forth. That's as expected. I'm looking at the scuffs specifically on the TCU itself, which is plugged into the conductor plate. And what I'm trying to ascertain is whether the conductor plate itself has been replaced or simply repaired, whether it's been replaced with a recoated part or whether it's simply been tested and repaired. You can see here some ordinary, it looks like a printed circuit board or a ribbon cable there exposed. Clearly that's the conductors that carry the signals from these solenoid bays here to the connector that goes to the vehicle. So we should be able to go ahead and reaffix this to our valve body and get to work there. The unit from the Module Repair Pros came with some helpful instructions that not only do we need to install the unit, but it's very important to clear the codes after it's been installed. Of course, that'll be one of our steps, and included a card for the shop in the event we want to send more business their way. So let's go ahead and get started on this valve body reassembly. So we're all staged for the reassembly here. We've got the newly repaired conductor plate here ready to go. It's oriented, aligned with in the same orientation as the valve body, with the solenoids lined up. The solenoids are still just resting in the holes of the valve body where we put them for safekeeping when we disassembled it. So I'm going to go ahead and take the solenoids out of their positions and set the clamps with them when we go ahead and get started on the reassembly. The Torx headed bolts, both the ones that hold the control unit to the valve body and also the ones that hold the solenoid clamps, those need to be torqued to 8 Newton meters, which is 5.9 foot-pounds. So we're going to go ahead and set our adjustable click torque wrench to that value. It's a 1/4 inch drive for such small values, and the Torx bits, one of them is a 1/4 inch drive and one of them is 3/8 drive, so we use an adapter to step up when we need to mount the T40 bit. Eight Newton meters is 70.81 inch-pounds. Okay, we've got 71 inch-pounds. So let's go ahead and remove these solenoids, being careful to preserve their position in the body. And we'll keep the clamps with the solenoids as well. So move these retaining screws for the conductor plate off to the side so they won't get mixed up with the solenoid clamp screws. There's one solenoid, 2, 3, 4. Clamp screw between those two. Clamp screw between those two. See what sort of alignment we get here. This is a little bit of a press fit and should be. That's what we're looking for, is where the press fit alignment is. There we go. There's the press fit. We're fully seated. And we want to go ahead and finger tighten these 7 fasteners. Okay, that's all 7 pre-started. Notice that there are 4 holes still unoccupied. These 2 here and these 2 here. Those are the locations for the hold down brackets for the solenoids when they're installed. So we're going to go ahead and torque these down. The factory manual doesn't indicate that there's any particular order for those, so we're just going to go ahead and take those T30s from snug to the 70.81 inch-pounds or 8 Newton meters, following a traditional pattern, working from the center outward. Going to go ahead and just use the 1/4 inch ratchet for the initial snug. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 way upward here. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 7. Okay, now to 8 Newton meters. Clicked. That's 1 bolt done. Clicked. 2 bolts done. Clicked. 3 bolts done. Clicked. 5 bolts done. Clicked. 6 bolts done. Clicked. 7 bolts done. So now the conductor plate is secured to the valve body. We'll go ahead and set the solenoids each in their respective holes. It helps to wet the O-rings on these with transmission fluid. If they've dried out, you can see that these are already quite wet. I'm going to go ahead and just slip them in place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now I'll go ahead and start the clamps in each one. Notice that this last solenoid on this side is offset from the others. It's in line in terms of the hole location, but it's rotated perhaps 15 degrees from parallel with the others. Just finger tight here initially. Okay, since that's the T40, let me go ahead and do the initial snug with the 3/8 drive. Okay, those are finger snug now. So again, just using the small adapter to step the 3/8 inch drive Torx bit to make it compatible with our 1/4 inch drive torque wrench. And let's take these T30s also to 8 Newton meters. Click, torqued. Click, torqued. Click, torqued. Click, torqued. Okay, that's fully assembled and ready for reinstallation in the vehicle. So the one thing to remember on reassembly here on this this corner is a slide. I'll go ahead and move the camera and show you that, or I'll just turn the valve body around so you get a better look at that. It's important that that slide engage its proper position on reassembly as the valve body goes back into the vehicle. So that slot on the reassembled valve body is right here. It's this piece. Okay, important that that slot be in its proper position on reassembly. Valve body installation. Try and get a good angle on the action. Here I've got the 10 T30 screws within reach. I only need a couple to hold the valve body in position once it's lifted up. So I'll just grab a couple initially. Start with 2, say. And then I've set the inch torque wrench to 34.5 inch pounds, because that is 4 Newton meters. When we torque the valve body in place, the bolts initially go to 4 Newton meters and then they go another 90 degrees. So this shouldn't be too bad, because as we lift the valve body into place, there's a little bit of a frame here to kind of catch it on to help support the weight. The key thing to look out for is this pin here that's on the selector detent cam has to engage with a sliding groove on the valve body. So it's important that that groove straddle this position. So let's go ahead and start lifting into place here and see if we can get at least approximately into position. There's a kind of a tricky pin and socket issue at the rear, where the pin that rises from the rearmost position on the conductor plate has to fit into a hole in the casting. So I'm kind of working on guiding that into place, trying to feel for what the other sticky points are. I do have the issue of aligning the groove here, but we're not quite able to get that much height. We're caught on something else. Still trying to get a little wiggle movement here and figure out what needs to go in what order. Sometimes there's a little bit of a rocking action that's involved in getting these back into place. So far, no real breakthroughs here. It feels slightly closer, but I'm still quite a ways off. Feels like the binding, if any, is on the driver's side. Almost feels like those parts have to go on first, maybe, kind of rock into place there. So far, not much luck. Again, I'm able to get the passenger side quite high, but the driver's side is making some internal contact that I'm not able to get past. The alignment here for the electrical connector seems fine, but what's happening is that the shift detent mechanism, it has to actually go above this pin here before it engages in the groove. So I'm not able to get that. So we're going to try moving the shifter and seeing if that rotates the pin towards the rear of the vehicle. That might enable me to lift it in place. And then with a helper in the car to move the shifter forward again. That'll take care of it. Won't move at all. It's locked. Yes, there. Okay, stop there. Okay, that's certainly better. I don't know if we're perfect yet. Just need to get any two screws started to take the weight. I can only hold this up so long. See how this is going to tighten up. Okay. All right, that's feeling pretty good. So number 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it should be, oops, wrong one. 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Sorry.
Okay, now I don't need further help.
Okay, what do you do? I'm right here.
Okay, okay. So we're getting the finger tight, and then we'll get them very gently hand tight using a 4-inch driver, and then finally tighten them to 4 millimeters. Newton meters, sorry. Oh, shoot. That can't be good. Like sort of a cracking noise and something bouncing off my nose. That's unexpected. So somebody was caught where they shouldn't be as the thing's seated. And I think what that was, I actually can see it now. It's an assembly error from the initial assembly of the conductor plate to the valve body. At the trailing edge, the rear edge, there is a little bit of a plastic hook that catches on a cast ear that protrudes from the rearmost edge of the valve body. And as we assembled the conductor plate, the long trailing edge of the conductor plate to mate with the valve body, I had that tongue sitting completely underneath the groove instead of in the groove. So what's happened is, as we brought the valve body up tight, it broke that tab off. Luckily, I can see there's no further harm. No harm, no foul. The purpose of that groove is to support that trailing edge of the conductor plate, which is otherwise just plastic sticking out, flapping in the breeze while you're trying to put the valve body in. So our valve body is in place. The conductor plate is well and properly torqued. It must have just been a little bit bent until that tab broke off. So we're actually just going to continue with the assembly. That was a little bit exciting. And certainly unexpected. Okay, so everybody's in and just the tiniest bit finger tight. We're going to come back and do 4 Newton meters. And then on the last pass, it's an additional 90 degrees. Again, this is set to 34.5 inch-pounds to represent 4 Newton meters. Done. 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 So now the recommended 90 degrees additional. This takes a little bit of nerves of steel here because this is an aluminum bolt going into an aluminum housing, but this is Mercedes' recommendation for the torque. The intent is that the bolts stretch a little bit. So we're going to take our 90 degrees here. 90. 90. 90. 90. And I can't stress enough how important it is to get that initial 4 Newton meters correct, because this 90 is on top of that value, and 4 Newton meters is not a lot of torque at all. It's very little. So there's 90, 90, 90, 90, 90, and the final bolt. Okay, we're all torqued in, ready to go. All we need now is the oil pan with its fresh gasket and the filter popped in place, held by the bolts going around the outside that are really the clamp castings held by screws, and fill from the bottom on this vehicle. So before we do that, we'll take a closer look at the how the filling mechanism works while we still have the pan out of the car to examine it. The way this fill system works is that the fill plug is directly connected to a pipe that goes a considerable height above the base of the pan. So when you fill it from the bottom, the fluid does not begin to overflow until it rises above the level of the top of this riser pipe. Okay, so the first order of business is to install the filter that doesn't have any fasteners or anything. It just pops on here, just a friction fit with its O-ring, pops into that position. And with two screws at the ready, we've got the pan ready to lift into place. With the gasket on, not showing any sort of wrinkles. The pan does have to be tipped into place because the trailing edge has to go over the cross member there. But that's now should now be above that point. Well, not quite actually. Not quite. It looks a little tighter than I expected to get in there. We have to both be over the valve body and aligned with the over the cross member here. Feels like I am indeed in place here. I don't feel any wrinkles or rolls in the gasket all the way around. So I'll go ahead and spin one fastener into place. Okay, that's done. So now a second fastener on the other side. Same drill. I do think the most important thing to keep an eye on is that the gasket has not slipped off the lip as that initial contact is made, because if it rolled into the pan, then there'll be a terrible leak as we begin to fill it. But that seems fine. So now we have the initial fasteners in place. Go ahead and work my way around. Number 3. Turns out that in many of the positions, the slotted aluminum blocks that actually contact the pan and hold it in place, they can actually rotate 360 degrees while you're tightening the fastener. So it's important in the final turns that the slot in the cast block mate with the lip of the pan as it's tightened. But that's really quite obvious as you're doing the initial tightening. Okay, that one's in. Took a little more effort to try to align the slot with the pan on that passenger side rear, because it's kind of on the corner, but that still went in just fine. Nothing particularly challenging about any of these, except that proceed with due care, because it's an aluminum screw going into an aluminum transmission, so very soft, easy to cross thread. You want to be sure you get a good start on each fastener before you start running it the rest of the way in. You want to be sure it gets a good square start. It feels to me like a corner could have popped ever so slightly off here, so I think I need to slack some fasteners off and investigate that. It'll need to come down quite a bit. It's going to have to come down enough for me to get finger clearance to push that back into place. So I'm hopeful that doesn't mean I have to remove the whole pan, but if it does, it's very important that that gasket get a good start. Okay, I feel like I've got good pressure there, able to roll it into place. Good, it's good, it's good, no gap. Okay, I'm going to be fine. Go ahead and tighten this back up. Okay, those are nice and snug. So the one final fastener in the corner with the electrical connector, the one that needs to also carry the heat shield. Even though I've got good contact on all these to hold the gasket in place, it seems as though I need to take a little bit of pressure off to let the pan slide across the gasket surface a bit, just to allow the final screw to start. And we don't want to let it separate at all because that would allow the gasket to move. But it seems like we might need to make a very gentle shift rearward with the pan, which I can do as soon as that's loosened just a bit. And now, yes, we're able to move, and I'll go ahead and get this started now. Okay, we've got the transmission up to operating temperature, which had to be over 113 Fahrenheit, which is 45 Celsius. So now with my arrangement here of a barrel pump feeding my somewhat drippy connector here, we'll be able to tell when it's full. So the valve body removal and conductor plate change is complete. So we have one last step to do on the Autel scanner, which is to clear the previously stored code. So on power up, when it's plugged in the OBDII, you choose Scan, European, then Mercedes, and you can choose the E-Class. E-Class, this is a 211 for this year range. And this was made post June 2006. I'm not sure that that matters especially. It's left-hand steering. And instead of auto scanning, we're going to go straight to the control units in the drive line, straight to the transmission, because we knew this was where it had previously stored codes about the speed sensor. It's attempting to communicate with the electronic transmission control unit. Okay, and I'm going to go straight to read codes, establishing communication, and I expect there will be at least one code in here from the failures that we had on the last trip before the repair. And we do indeed have a code 2767, the signal from component Y38N2, which is the internal speed sensor, is not available. And that was indeed the code that it was throwing before. I'm not going to save that because I'm already aware of it. I've already got a copy of that code saved. I'm pushing down arrow to see if there are any other codes. There are not. So I'm going to escape out. I'm going to go to erase codes. Tell it yes, I do want to get rid of them. Erase codes command sent. Perform read codes to verify. So now I hit escape. And it wants to know if I have switched the ignition off and back on after 10 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Key off. Key on. I'll tell it yes. It's going ahead and establishing communications. And now we'll tell it read codes. System pass, no fault codes detected. So that's clean. The car is now ready to roll.